I cannot.
Okay.
All right, this is a sound check. Can anyone hear me? 1, 1, 1. So there's an issue with Kevin's computer, so he's going to take my seat here, and I'll just listen on the side. So that's good to know. We thought the whole sound system was down.
Sorry. I will. I just so you know. Are you gonna sit over there or on the windowsill? No. All right. Hello, everyone. A little bit of technical difficulties. I'm all set up for my home office down at the coast, and so this is the first time back in the office since early December. So good to see everyone. Let me just do a quick attendance check. It looks like we've got Michael McIlway, who's been very, very nice to let use his desk. Appreciate that. We've got Commissioner Babbitts.
Yeah, Kevin, you've got
Gordon Kelsey from Klickitat County.
Kevin, you have feedback going there. Can you turn this?
Looks like we have Justin Witham from Anna Williams' office. Mayor McBride is in attendance. Commissioner Chapman is in. Let's see, Commissioner Fox, the new Port of Hood River Commissioner, is in. Michael Williams from WashDOT is in. Miles Pengele from Thorn Run is in. Rob Watman from ODOT. Bob Benton from Hood River County. Looks like we've got Matt Ransom from the RTC, or he was there for a second. And then we've got Steve Siegel. So I think, can somebody say something? I'm not sure if I'm actually hearing them.
Yes.
I can hear you. This is Commissioner Anderson. I'm here as
All
well.
right, well, I think with that, Miles, do you want to, why don't we start off with you? We got some great news at the end of the legislative session on the Oregon side. So if you want to maybe recap the session and what we can look forward to, not only for when we might be seeing that money, but also the progress on the governance legislation.
Yeah, happy to. Well, I will not bury the lead here, as I'm sure most, if not all of you have already heard. We were successful in getting $5 million in for the Hood River Bridge project. So that is terrific news. That was Herculean effort by the commissioners who are part of this BiState working group. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Justin, who is on the line, who is Representative Williams, Chief of Staff, and to Representative Williams, also to Senator Thompson and his Chief of Staff, John. As Justin knows,
100%.
Constant communication with them about the status of this funding request throughout the session, strategizing and working with them. Commissioner Everett testified in front of the Joint Transportation Committee and worked with Kevin and Michael to put together a really excellent comprehensive presentation on this project back in March that I think was critical. I want to thank Commissioner Benton for testifying in front of the Capital Construction Subcommittee in support of this funding, and through all of your efforts. And Kevin and I met with over 20 legislative leaders on transportation and budget issues, not to mention staff from ODOT and the governor's office to talk about this project, to convey the importance of this project, and provide updates on where we were with the bridge project and where the 5 million would fit in and what that would accomplish. So tremendous success, and thank you to all of you for your work and your help and your letters, and especially to the Hood River Legislative Delegation of Representative Williams and Senator Thompson for getting that across the finish line. So one, I think a bit of a surprise, we're still working details of, we had initially thought funding for that project through lottery funds. Lottery funds. I'm getting a little feedback.
Does that matter, do you think?
You, that would be great.
I don't think so. Your host, you're still on over there, right?
Let's see, I don't think I am, but
Kevin, would you mind going on?
oh yeah, I am over there. You think I maybe need to close that out first?
No, just keep that on because that's the host machine. It's on this one right now.
Yeah.
Close out of it.
And maybe Michael.
Can you close out of yours?
Yes, don't do anything with that. But we need, the host needs to maintain. If you close out of this.
Okay. Thanks folks for being patient. We got this funding via the American Rescue Plan Act rather than via lottery funds as we expected. Lottery bond sales are usually what's used for economic development projects and infrastructure funding. And while that was the path that we went, we ended up getting funding via the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. One of the things that happened this session, as I'm sure most of you are aware, we entered the session with a $1.3 billion budget deficit, and it was the American Rescue Plan Act and the $2.6 billion of federal funding that came from the federal government that turned that deficit into a surplus and really improved our odds of getting the bridge project funded. There's been a lot of work by Oregon's budget writers to figure out what the American Rescue Plan or ARPA dollars can be used for and what they can't be used for. There were extensive guidelines coming out of the U.S. Treasury in terms of what that money could and couldn't be used for, and the legislature is still working to figure that out and to figure out, where can the federal money be used directly for some of these projects. Where does the federal money need to be used to backfill state agency budgets, thus freeing up the general fund dollars that usually go to the budgets, so those funds can be used for other things. So we expect a sort of reconciliation bill that may change the color of money for a number of the projects that receive funding this session. But as of now, it looks like the project will be getting ARPA funds, which will be directed to the Department of Administrative Services, DAS, and then on to ODOT, and ODOT will be allocating that $5 million to the Port of Hood River to match, of course, the federal money that we got from the BUILD grant, as well as the $5 million that was secured from the Washington legislature this session. So that is where we sit on the bridge project funding. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So besides the funding, the other big thing that we worked on this session was socializing the concept of the BiState Bridge Authority, the governance structure for the new Hood River Bridge. As you probably recall, while we introduced a bill to direct the Port of Hood River to start studying and defining what that BiState Bridge Authority would look like, we ended up not moving forward with that bill. that was a decision that we made after talking to Representative McLean, who is one of the co-chairs of the Joint Transportation Committee. I think they are having, she's also the co-chair of the I-5 Bridge Committee, and they continue to navigate issues around a bridge authority for the I-5 bridge. And so she thought it would be cleaner and make their life easier in their work on the I-5 bridge.
Doesn't matter, I can't hear that.
Didn't introduce any legislation talking about bridge authorities for the 2021 session. And she essentially said, look, I really support this project. I want to help you get funding for the Hood River Bridge project this session, which she did. She was an excellent advocate for us and an influential advocate as the co-chair of the Joint Transportation Committee.
Damn, this is the first meeting of Fox.
Let's come back and explore.
First meeting, I want to.
Michael, would you mind going?
BiState working group.
Anyway, so we didn't move forward with that legislation, but Kevin and I did have opportunities to
So if I
socialize.
just dial the Zoom meeting?
No, you don't hit the link. There's a phone number down below.
For moving forward with the BiState Bridge Authority, and why that's an important step for 2022. So in advocating for the $5 million this session, we had great opportunity.
So if I get out of this,
Just leave.
We will be speaking with next session about the Bridge Authority and starting to explain to them why this authority is important and why we're going to need to pass a bill in 2022. So we did make some good headway in terms of lobbying that concept. I know that Steve has an update for you on his work on the Bridge Authority legislative concept. On the Oregon front, what that looks like, and since Justin is on the line, he may have something to add, but we still need to get a legislative sponsor for the Bridge Authority legislation. Our goal is for this to be a committee bill, so it's elevated as a priority of the Joint Transportation Committee for the 2022 session. And certainly we're hopeful that Representative Williams and Senator Thompson will be sponsors of the legislation as well. It's a little bit challenging in Oregon during the short session simply because representatives can only introduce 2 priority bills and senators are limited to 1. So it's not like the long session where Senator Thompson and Representative Williams can introduce this bill and a number of others. They really need to make the choice that this is going to be one of their 1 or 2 top legislative priorities for the session. So once we get a bill sponsor to introduce this concept, we'll be able to work directly with Oregon's Legislative Council. Steve will be able to work directly with Oregon's Legislative Council on ensuring that the Oregon legislation is squared up with Washington legislation, and that we have functioning BiState Bridge Authority legislation coming out of both states. In terms of deadlines, bill requests for the 2022 session are due in September. So hopefully we can get the ball rolling on the legislative concept and working on that drafting before then. But obviously we're respectful of the fact that Hood River's legislative delegation have other priorities. They may still be figuring out what it is that they want to sponsor in terms of legislation for the coming session. And the same is true of the Joint Transportation Committee. So it may be a little while before we get a definite answer about who is going to be sponsoring this Bridge Authority bill and when we will be able to start work on that bill with Legislative Council. Any questions about?
Great. Thank you, Miles. Can everybody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Thank you. That's great. Excellent, Miles. Well, so I guess we'll continue to be working with the Washington legislature and finalizing at least the bill from a Washington perspective. And then is there anything that we should be doing in advance of a legislator moving a bill forward, just to kind of let folks in Salem know what we're working on?
Yeah, I think as we'll want to have for Washington, when there's clarity on the specifics of the legislative concept, and I realize we're close to reaching that point, being able to provide an outline, a 1 to 2 page document explaining what the bill is seeking to do, how it's seeking to do that, why it's seeking to do that, just essentially an informational document in as plain English as possible, explaining why we're doing this, so legislators and folks understand what it is.
I am, yeah.
And also, so why they understand that they understand why passing this bill in 2022 is important. So, I think that's a good tool to start developing now, both to use in pitching this bill to legislators, but also it will be very useful in continuing to lobby this concept in the 2022 session and leading up to it. And once we have a sponsor, we will also, want to start these meetings right away. There's no reason to wait until the session starts to start having these conversations. The earlier we can make sure that transportation leaders understand what we're doing and that they're supportive of it, and be able to ferret out potential concerns that they have, the smoother sailing we'll have in the 2022 session. It's only 5 weeks, so it's really a sprint, and it means that you really have to have all your ducks in a row, and essentially have obtained legislative support from the folks you need it from before the session starts, if you are going to successfully pass really any kind of bill in 2022. You're on mute, Kevin.
Are there any questions from the working group regarding that? I mean, it's going to be a little bit of coming from behind then, depending on how successful we are in getting the right legislator. I know Justin's here. Justin, do you have any? Are you hearing anything specific from the representative's perspective?
First, I want to ask, can everyone hear me? My internet is going a little haywire. Yep. Okay, excellent. Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in and say, well, first of all, thanks, Miles, for that overview, and thanks for all of your advocacy for the bridge funding over the last session. It is early to know for sure what Rep. Williams' policy priorities will be. This is obviously very much still on our radar. It was sort of a major disappointment early in the session when we realized it wasn't going to be moving forward, but we would love to take another swing at it. I think we share the hope that it can be introduced as a committee bill, because that will clear the way for other policy priorities to come through our office. We are definitely mindful of the fact that this needs to be done, and our conversations with Representative McLean, I think, and Miles and Kevin can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was an understanding there that there was a time-sensitive issue with getting this legislation passed, and she was understanding of that and wanted to help us get it through in 2022. So we'll look forward to keeping in touch over the next couple months as that September deadline approaches, and I don't know, I guess your continued advocacy to make sure that we can get these bills passed would be more helpful than anything.
That's great. Thank you, Justin. Any other questions or comments from the working group? Well, just Justin, please, thank you to the representative, and I don't believe Senator Thompson's on the line, but thank you so much for the $5 million and your advocacy for that, and the representative's advocacy. It's just an excellent sign of commitment to the project, and we understand that it was a very difficult session, but the fact that that Representative Williams was able to help and advocate for this funding means a lot for keeping the project moving forward, and really showing a BiState coordination for the effort. So thank you.
I was very happy to work on it, and while she did the bulk of the work, she is even happier.
I bet. Well, thank you very much for that. All right, Miles, I appreciate that. Let's see. Steve Siegel. So thank you, Miles. So Steve, we did receive some comments from your legal counsel, and Steve has been making last minute edits to his presentation based upon comments that have been coming in over the weekend. So Steve, I think can you share your screen, or is there anything I need to do on my end?
We'll see. Good?
Hey,
see-
that looks great.
Okay, thank you. Let me start by just giving you a general overview of the draft one review. And I would like to start by thanking everybody for being involved in the review, or having your attorneys being involved in review. We have received comments from actually 6 different attorneys. The period for receiving comments is not yet closed, so there might be some more by the end of this week. There's one particular attorney I'd like to point out here because it'll come up later, and that's the attorney retained by the Washington Joint Transportation Committee. You may recall that in Washington, legislation passed regarding what we used to call the study bill. And as associated with that, Washington appropriated $50,000 to have an independent review of what we're doing done for the Joint Transportation Committee. They retained an attorney named Stacy Lewis from Pacifica Law Group out of Seattle, who has been a great help in working through some of these issues. And what's really good about that is it's a totally independent review. So we're kind of getting a kind of a fresh perspective on this. After I receive the final comments for draft 1, I'm going to prepare a draft 2. That'll be available 2 weeks from today. We'll review the draft 2 comments at the August meeting of the BiState Working Group. And I think we're on schedule to have a final review and approval draft done and available by the September meeting of this group. And as you'll notice, that matches up with the time frame that's required out of the Oregon legislature. And it also matches up with the deadline established in the Washington legislation earlier this year. So on schedule. As a general matter, I think we have general acceptance of the concept by all the reviewers. The most important part of that was that we have concurrence from Stacy Lewis, who is charged with writing a report to the Joint Transportation Committee, that she agrees with the need for enabling legislation. You might recall that an alternative approach was to use the interlocal agreement, intergovernmental agreement legislation that exists in Oregon and Washington, and try to resolve the governance issue that way. This group reached the conclusion about a year ago that that was not going to work. The question came up in the Washington legislation. And Stacy is specifically charged with having to review and draw a conclusion on that. And her conclusion will be, when it comes out, that specific enabling legislation is the best way to go, and that there really is no practical way to accomplish what we're trying to do through the use of intergovernmental agreements. There was no problems identified with the powers and duties of the Bridge Commission. However, there are a variety of technical refinements to those, different words, further elaboration that will wind up in draft 2. But generally, what you saw in draft 1 will be pretty much what you'll see again in draft 2. There are 3 issues that were identified. I'm listing them here. I'm going to go through each one of them in the slides that follow. But just to identify them, one is that we have to restructure the act as general legislation. I'll define what that means in just a second. We need to establish the Bridge Commission as a public corporation. Again, we'll go through that in a little more detail. And lastly, not so much an issue, but just some sage advice, and that is to have a tax attorney review the language to ensure that it complies with federal regulations regarding the tax exempt status of the bonds. And we are in fact engaged in having that done. Little overview about general legislation. Firstly, when we wrote the first draft, it referred specifically to the Hood River Bridge. It mentioned each of your jurisdictions by name. It was solely applicable to that specific situation. And as it turns out, that special legislation that is not permitted by the state constitution of Washington. It would be permitted under Oregon law, but not under Washington law. In order to resolve that problem, we have to write it as general legislation, meaning that any other bi-state region seeking to replace an interstate bridge will be able to create a bridge commission under the same legislation. So think of Cascade Locks as an example. So this has to be written in a manner that would apply to any bi-state region seeking to replace an interstate bridge. That makes it general legislation. The result of restructuring that general legislation is as follows. Number one, you'll see in the next draft that all references to the Hood River Bridge or to the specific names of cities and counties will be removed and replaced with generic terms like cities and counties rather than the names of your cities and counties. And it will also be changed so that the act itself does not establish the Bridge Commission, but instead requires the local area governments to enter into an interlocal agreement or an intergovernmental agreement to form the bi-state commission. So the legislation draft 1, the Bridge Commission would have been formed by the enactment of the legislation itself. To make it general legislation, we'll have a second step requiring an intergovernmental agreement, which therefore means that we'll have a second step that follows the approval of the laws themselves. As part of the fix, we're going to take out some of the specifics relating to the composition and appointment process for the board of the BiState Bridge Commission, and require that to be set in the intergovernmental interlocal agreements, so that if we want to have 6 or 10 or whatever amount of board members appointed by the counties with nominations by the other members of the BiState Working Group, which is where we were in draft 1, we would include that in our intergovernmental agreement. Whereas if it were Cascade Locks, they might want to go a different way, and they could do that by structuring their intergovernmental agreement differently. The one thing to note is that if the legislation were to pass and we finalize the intergovernmental agreement, at that point, we're pretty much exactly in the same place as we would have been on the draft 1. It just takes that extra step. The second change you might note, and this is a bit of a technicality, I only raise it just in case it requires some other changes that we still have to research. So in the draft 1, we established the form of the Bridge Commission as a municipal corporation. However, it turns out that under Washington law, a municipal corporation would require that we describe a geographic boundary, a district, if you will, within which that municipal corporation is entitled to act. Under Oregon law, that would then make the actions of the Bridge Commission subject to initiative, petition, and referendum. It turns out that this issue has come up before, and both states have another form, a public corporation, that may be more appropriate for a governing body that is really focused on developing and operating a facility, as opposed to being a more general kind of government. One example in Oregon is Oregon Health Science University is in fact a public corporation. It was made so in about 20 years ago after it was taken out of the Oregon State University system. There are examples also in Washington law. In fact, there is a statute that enables cities and counties to create public corporations, which are sometimes called public development authorities under Oregon law. And so nothing new, but the one thing to note about municipal corporation, about public corporations compared to municipal corporations is there are the laws are the existing laws are less precise about what governs public corporations. So we're going to have to think through more what that means to us, and we will address whatever the result of that review is as part of the draft 2 that you'll see in a couple of weeks.
Steve, what slide are you on?
I'm on slide 6.
I
Is
don't
it
think
not?
that's I don't think that's moving along.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm pressing the slideshow. I don't know. I'll do it this way. So let me, I don't know why that didn't work. I apologize. I'll just continue from slide 6 if that's okay. Or do I need to go back? Kevin, any advice?
I think keep going.
Okay, thank you. So one of the last issue that came up that's worth focusing on today is just to make sure that the legislation as we're preparing it would qualify for a federal tax exemption on the interest from its bonds. And I'm sorry, that keeps ringing too. The state legislation can make and does make, as written, the bonds exempt from state interest in both Oregon and Washington. But it cannot, as a state law, expressly make the bonds exempt from federal taxes. That needs to be done by structuring the legislation correctly so that it complies with the Internal Revenue Code requirements and the associated regulations. One of the reasons why we use the term municipal corporation in the first draft was that is a term that is expressly used in the IRA code and regulations. Now that we're structuring it as a public corporation, we got to be more careful. Now, I don't really think this is a problem, and I think we'll be fine, but we are having a tax attorney take a look at this and make sure that the language is correct and that there is no doubt that the bonds issued by this entity would be tax exempt under federal law. And there may be a need for certain changes as a result of that. That remains to be seen. But that said, I don't really expect any major changes will be required, but we are waiting for the results from the tax attorney. So with that, I'll stop and just see if there's any questions or discussion.
I have one question. This is Christy. Would it save a lot of time and energy to restructure this as a, if we added the words within a scenic area, between mileposts, X, Y, and Z, so that we don't have to make it generalized for the entire border of Washington and Oregon, and we could focus it specifically on the Hood River Bridge? Or is it better to make it generalized for everyone to use?
Two things. One is I will double check with the Washington attorney that I'm working with and ask that question specifically, because it's really a Washington law question. This would not be an issue under Oregon law. Number two, my guess is we're better off the way it is, because it is very much in line with the way quite a bit of other Washington legislation is structured, and therefore it won't look unusual or weird. But I will ask that question directly to the Washington attorney working on this and get you a response.
Steve, this is Kevin. In the general legislation, you mentioned that the names of the cities and the counties will be made generic. Will there also be a placeholder for local special districts as well?
Yes.
Steve, this is Mike Fox. So listening to your presentation, and I appreciate it. The question that comes to my mind is, when do you see that we're going to have legislation in place that we can proceed forward? Number one. Number two, not having this legislation, will it impact our ability to attract the heavy funds we need for the bridge replacement and awarding subsequent contracts?
Answer to the second one is yes, it would be a problem. I tend to believe, and our initial schedule had this being done in the 2023 session. And I would say if we would be okay if it doesn't happen until the 23 session. That said, I think it's a great benefit to have it done in the 22 session if it's at all possible. First of all, it squares away the whole governance issue so that everybody understands it. The existence of it gives a place, should there be a transportation package either in 22 or 23 in Oregon and Washington, you know, it gives a place for that money to go. So it resolves the issue that both states are putting in money and there's a bi-state commission that oversees that grant money. And I think lastly, there's some practical aspects too, which is the quicker we get this put together, the quicker there's a board, the quicker there's a board, the more time they have to smooth out some of the wrinkles, get the board, get the structure up and fully functioning prior to making some of the really hard core decisions like project delivery, construction, applying for TIFIA loans and all that. Like to have, gotta have, I really want to have, I guess is the way to put it, at least 1 year under their belt before that. Great to have 2 years under their belt before making those kind of decisions.
What is our plan B? What happens if we see that the existing bridge is degrading much faster than what we thought it was, which means now we're on schedule critical? How do we handle that?
Well, of course, there's no way to proceed with the bridge without having substantial grants, whether they're from one or both states or the federal government. And I don't see having a financeable bridge until that happens. So that ultimately will become the critical path. If we get the governance structure passed in 22 or 23, it will not be on the critical path. If it does not get approved for some reason, we'll have to put together a different approach using either a specific entity, whether it be the Port Hood River or somebody else, and then try to create some kind of combination of intergovernmental, interlocal agreements to make it work for everybody. I think maybe we can get there that way, but it will be, it won't be as good as this approach.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Steve, so we will eventually be sending out a second draft back to our individual councils. When do we?
2
when do
weeks
you
from
anticipate that?
2 weeks from today, we'll have a second draft out. And one of the things I will do is put together a 1 or 2 page outline of some of the key changes. I know some of these issues are kind of your technical legal issues that not everybody's going to want to read through, but I will put together a summary of the major changes and hope let people decide which parts of the draft 2 are worth reviewing from their perspective. We will have continuing involvement from a few attorneys, including the Washington Transportation Joint Transportation Committee attorney. And like I said, that's really a great asset. That's working out extremely well for us, and will help us make the case not only in Washington but in Oregon about why this kind of legislation is needed. That will be in her final report.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for the materials. I will send. I believe everybody received a draft version of Steve's presentation. I will send you the updated one and post it on the BiState Working Group website as well.
Yeah, I
So,
really apologize. I was trying to write the presentation even before I got some of the comments, and certainly before I absorbed them. So I had to fix it a little bit over the weekend. So I apologize for that.
And please thank your attorneys for submitting comments. Those were very, very helpful.
Extremely helpful.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. So I will just transition into just a general bridge update. And I apologize. While we were trying to get our technical difficulties here at the port figured out, I missed the part of Miles' presentation about the flow of money from Washington State to the port. And I did talk with Gordy and with Commissioner Anderson and Senator King. And Gordy, step in, or any of the commissioners from Klickitat County. My understanding is that the funds are going to be flowing from Olympia via WashDOT through to ODOT, and then ODOT and the Port of Hood River will maintain that agreement for managing the contracts. Does that sound right, Gordy?
Yeah, that's correct.
Gotcha. Did Miles review that? Maybe he didn't, but I think that actually this was a good solution. I think it's going to make things a lot more efficient instead of having one contract with Federal Highways, one with ODOT, and one with WashDOT. This will allow for just 2 contracts, one a larger one with ODOT and a separate one with Build. As I understand it, Federal Highways is interested in actually working directly with the port for the administration of their $5 million. And I have been meeting with representatives from the 3 agencies just to coordinate contracting methods and which methods we're going to be following. It sounds like we will be using the ODOT procurement rules following Federal Highways Oregon Division guidance. So I think that's a good step in the right direction as far as making the process a little simpler. Another item that I wanted to bring to your attention, if you recall at our last meeting, we drafted a letter for the federal delegation. That was for our 4 combined US senators and our 2 combined regional Congress people. And so I did put a draft letter in the packet. If you see your name on there as a signatory, please sign that and scan it and send it my way, and then I will get that to Hal this evening. We did also receive a joint signed letter with the help of Miles and with Brad Boswell, with Senator King and Representatives Corey and Mossbrucker on the Washington side, and Senator Thompson and Representative Williams on the Oregon side. So thank you to them for a combined letter, and that will be going to the federal delegation as well. And then the final letter that will be going out is a Gorge 1 letter as well today. So Hal will appreciate those letters of advocacy, and that's just, we'll continue to bring this forward and get it in front of the federal delegation. We were specific in not including a dollar amount. That was done specifically because it's unclear at this time how much money is going to be available or what's the right size. And so it was more important just to put the project in front of the delegation at this point.
Kevin, this is Arthur.
Yes.
Can you say a little bit more about why wouldn't we simply say that we need something in the order of 340 million, and why are we implying that there's going to be significant money coming from elsewhere?
Well, I think that the issue wasn't so much that there was money coming from elsewhere. It was a lack of clarity in Washington, D.C. about what the right size ask would be.
So the way I read the letter, it says we need 340 million, but don't worry because we have significant money coming from elsewhere also. That's kind of how I take the letter as it's currently phrased.
We had originally talked about a 5 to 10 million smaller amount for this pre-engineering side. And then we talked about a larger ask, and it was Hal's, and actually it was also Senator King brought up the fact that it probably made sense to keep it more open with less clarity, so that, you know, based upon what comes out of the legislative process, Hal and his team can be more specific at that time. I think the main thing is that we want to make sure that the project is in front of them, and that whatever the funding amount is going to be, it's going to be on their, it's going to be first and foremost in their mind.
So Kevin, how can we get more certainty on what the real ask needs to be?
Well, at the federal level, I think that's something that we have to wait on the process currently going on in DC. We did hear at our last meeting in June, Senator King identified that he had $150 million placeholder for capital contribution for Washington's portion. And so that's a great step in the right direction. And so it's unclear whether there's going to be a special session on the Washington side this year, or if there will be a special transportation package coming in the following session.
That's not what I'm asking, Kevin. I'm asking, you know, you as the director of this particular project, what is the total ask that we need to have, and how confident are you in that number?
So for the construction, it's in that $340 million mark. There are other soft costs that on the high end would be 400 million. And so those would be the two high end costs for the project.
How do you know that?
We had these are planning level cost estimates. And so as part of our contract with WSP for the NEPA process, They produced a very preliminary construction cost estimate with a low and high range, and we used the high range. I believe there was 40% contingency. And then for the other costs, we basically identified from our other contractors what it would cost to establish the governance, to obtain credit ratings, traffic and revenue studies, and et cetera.
Yeah, so as I get named to this board, I'm going to want to see those estimates. I'd like to go through them, and I'd like to have WSP and some kind of a side group explain to me where the numbers came from. I think it's super critical for this organization here to have a really good feeling that the numbers we're going after is at least in the good ballpark, that it's reality. Otherwise, how can we stand up and really say, yeah, this is what we need? And 5 million is great, guys, but 5 million by itself, we're never going to get a bridge done. We've got to be going for something much bigger. And maybe it's two chunks. Kind of depends on how you want to execute this project, but something in the neighborhood of $35–40 million is probably your design cost, and the balance is going to be construction. So I think it's super critical that we really understand how good are these numbers and what would it take to get them a little better. So I'm going to be asking for that.
No, I think that's a legitimate question, and one that I think we've all been asking for. When we applied for the build grant, it was to get 15% engineering, but perhaps even more importantly, it was to include geotechnical boring, because there's a lot of the risk in the project is really an understanding what's under the riverbed. And so there's less than 5% engineering done on this project as part of NEPA. And so that's, once we have a project management team on board, the next thing is to get that AE design firm so that they can get the geotech done. We can actually get the geotech done once the funding comes in on our current contract with WSP. The feds are just making sure that our contracting method for selecting WSP met the federal guidelines because it was done with Oregon money. So,
well, I'd still like to go through the WSP numbers, understand how they arrived at them, and we can take a look at the risk of the geotech versus the upper structure and so on. But I think we got to take a real good hard scrub of what are those numbers. I'm so afraid that we're thinking too small, and we go through this whole exercise. By the time it pops out, we don't have enough money. And maybe those are the right numbers, but I have zero confidence right now that those are in the ballpark. So I just personally, I'd like to understand it more. And if anybody else would like to participate in that, I think that would be great. The more all of us know about this, probably the better. So enough said.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. These are very, very low end cost estimates based upon less than 5% engineering. And we can certainly bring WSP into to discuss that. But very good points.
So Kevin,
I'd ask that you set that up in the next week or two.
Kevin, so presuming that we know how much money we need overall, there's $1 trillion funding package moving through DC for infrastructure, and we're moving along. And my concern is that we arrive with our ask at the time when the money is actually available. And can you explain how that happens? Because it sounds like what you're saying is it's not quite the time now to say what we actually need. We're waiting for Hal to tell us something. I'm just trying to follow how you described it, but somehow Hal is going to be telling us when it's appropriate for us to ask for how much money. Is that what's going on?
Well, not only the dollar amount to be asking for, but what is the process going to be? For example, one option would be that they would plus up currently existing grant programs like infra or like build. They could just add money to that and add some parameters. So all of those types of details as to how much and how the money is going to be distributed has yet to be determined. And that's where Hal is at monitoring that on behalf of the region.
And so when does that happen, as Hal told us?
At this point, it's unclear. There hasn't been a specific deadline that I've heard of that is, when that's supposed to be determined.
Okay, I just get very worried that we're gonna hear it's too early, it's too early, it's too early, it's too late.
Well, I understand your that concern, and I'm talking with Hal frequently, and I trust his judgment. And I think getting these letters out today on the 12th was his recommendation, and I think we're going to be doing that. But I will certainly follow up on any other hard deadlines that I can bring forward at our next get together, if not earlier.
Kevin,
Yes.
this is Kate. On the letter that Arthur was talking about, so I just got that today. I believe you just sent that copy of that out today. Is that correct?
The draft went out on Friday, but it said draft on it. So I sent you out a clean copy today.
Okay, all right. If there's any way that we could get those things even in a draft form to have a little bit more time to look at it. Arthur had some comments on the wording on it. And, when we're going to do a sign on like this, I really like to run it by our manager, read through it myself, and if there's a couple words I'd like to change, get that draft back to you and see what others think if, they want to make a couple changes. Because I do have, a little bit of a concern, the same concern that Arthur had with it, that it's like, well, we're going to get money from 3 or 4 places. We hope we get money from you. So it just kind of comes across a little bit like that. So just if you could do it a little bit earlier in the process, so we'd have a little more time to get back to you with comments, that'd be appreciated. Thanks.
Not a problem. Certainly. Any other questions on the letter? I can follow up with you individually just to make sure you've got what you need, or if you want me to forward it to anybody else, I can certainly follow up with you after the meeting. Just wanted to give you a couple other items. Your agency may be getting a notice for the 3rd consulting party meeting, and all of the local governments were asked to be consulting parties at the beginning of the NEPA process. This meeting will be to start developing mitigation agreements for Section 106 on the cultural resource, archaeological, and historic resource impacts. And ultimately, what will happen is an agreement, either a programmatic agreement or a memo of understanding will be developed that commits the project to undertake the mitigation related to those resources. We also had a very positive meeting with the Yakima Nation last week. We covered fishing access, specifically at the treaty fishing access site, effective fish, and the cultural resource sites. We were originally scheduled for 30 minutes, ended up going 90 minutes, and there was no objection to the project, and there was even some support for the project. There will likely be a request, since that treaty fishing access site over on the white salmon side will likely be closed during construction due to the close proximity to the preferred alternative, that I anticipate that there will be a request for some compensation for their loss of access to the fishing site. So we'll certainly be following federal highways guidance as far as how those equations are determined and how those, what those compensation amounts may be. But that'll likely happen as part of the permitting, not as part of the NEPA process. So we've got a little bit of time once we have our project managers on board to get some assistance in regards to that. But that's going to be a big one, I think, is just making sure that we've got a good understanding of what the compensation will be for the loss of fishing. Let's see. Just a thank you to your legal counsels. Been exchanging emails with headquarters for U.S. Department of Transportation on the build grant. Just got hopefully our final 8 questions that I will be working with WSP on to get them their responses. If those are adequate, hopefully we'll be able to start developing the actual grant agreement. And I think everything else is in the written report. So if there's anything in there that was of interest to you, let me know, and I can certainly try to answer any questions or field any comments you might have. All right. Well, I will be giving Hal a phone call. I'll see if there's some more specifics that I can generate, and I'll send out an email with anything new that I have in regards to the federal process. And then I will follow up with you individually too about the language in the letter and processes for getting signatures. And I think, let's see, our next meeting is in August, and that would be Monday, August the 9th, 2 o'clock. So are there any other comments, any other statements that members of the working group would like to make? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I appreciate your time, and I will be following up with a phone call. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.